bunch of people that he likes better. Poilievre talks about bail issues and violent home invasions and carjackings. There's a whole lot of arrive scam stuff going on. There's a whole lot to get to. Let's get to it first. We have to talk about, well, this is an interesting quote. I like memes. This is just a statement, really. And it says, mass invasion of a country is an act of war. Yes. A government failing to protect a country is an act of treason. Yes. We have treasonous people in our government enabling this act of war invasion. And why? Why? It's a great question. Well, it goes back to the Opium Wars, you see. Justin Trudeau says, so many Tamil Canadians are thinking about the horrors of Black July today. Oh, I thought Black July, and I'm making a joke here just in case anyone's not sure, but I thought Black July had something to do with like Black Friday, right? Like there were some big Tamil sales. I'm kidding. I have no idea what Black July is, though, and I find it strange that Canadian politicians are pandering to every single minority that you could possibly pander to while not calling for any kind of unity. We're gonna celebrate every subculture in Canada and not Canadian culture and not Canadians ever. It's crazy. And this has been the strategy since Justin Trudeau took office. Anyway, he carries on. As we remember the thousands of innocent people who were killed and everyone who suffered in that brutal chapter of Sri Lanka's history, we commit to building a future here and around the world free of hate. What? What? So I'm sure Black Friday or Black July was terrible. Black Friday can be terrible too. I'm sure Black July was terrible, but it happened in Sri Lanka, and Canadians barely understand our own history, never mind a foreign country's history. Nobody's talking about Black July, Justin. Pierre Poilievre, they are talking about the crime wave that's happening in Canada. This is like the first Ninja Turtles movie, for crying out loud. Pierre Poilievre says 18 people, 150 offenses, including violent home invasions and carjackings. 9 have already been released on bail. 6 others were already out on bail on release orders when they were arrested. This is Justin Trudeau's catch and release lunacy. So Toronto Sun is reporting 18 charged with 150 offenses in violent Peel home invasions and carjackings. So that's not great, right? That's not so good. Here is an MPP, and he's talking about how this is wildly inappropriate. So here we go.
When we make these investments, inevitably there are politicians and other public figures who are quick to criticize. They argue we shouldn't be funding the police the way that we are, that the funding would be better spent somewhere else. Heck, sometimes they just tell us to abolish the police altogether. But now to address the elephant in the room. When I was briefed on Project Warlock, I was dismayed to hear that several of the suspects in custody were arrested while out on bail. And this is a story that residents are sick and tired of hearing. Repeat and violent offenders who continue to walk our streets because of the revolving door justice system. I hear from police regularly about catching the same criminal 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times. And to hear that today police are arresting the same people who've already been previously arrested breaks my heart. Project Warlock involves 18 arrests, 150 criminal code charges laid. That's 17 violent home invasions, armed robberies, and carjackings, guns and knives used against innocent people. Shame on our society if these individuals are allowed out on bail to do it again. I understand that it's the role of judges to interpret the law and make rulings. It's not a politician's business to get involved, fine. But the criminal code that they're interpreting is written by politicians, specifically the federal politicians that we have in Ottawa. Premier Ford wrote a letter over a year and a half ago, signed by all 13 provinces and territories in Canada, calling on Prime Minister Trudeau to implement meaningful bail reform. We have continued to see a revolving door justice system ever since. On behalf of the Ontario government, I'm echoing that call here today. We have 11 Liberal MPs here in Peel Region who represent the governing party. I hope that they're listening. I hope they're advocating to the Prime Minister to do the right thing. Put yourself in a victim's shoes. Imagine an armed scumbag breaks into your home, puts a gun to your head. Police do their jobs and catch the guy who did it. You expect him to go to jail, only you see him at the gym the next day because the lax criminal code let him out on bail. Enough is enough. Ontario has done its part. Peel has done its part. Peel Police, they've gone above and beyond what anybody could reasonably expect of them. We need the federal government to do their part. Let's make it happen.
So there you go. Even if you get big headlines about arrests, oh man, we made all these arrests and everything's great, they just get let out, right? Like, they just get let out. Cam Guthrie is upset about, everything. Mayor Guthrie says, open drug use in public spaces should not be tolerated. When will upper levels of government, and more specifically our federal justice system and prosecutors help? Is turning our downtowns, parks and trails and sport fields into no-go zones a desired outcome? It sure seems like it. So who is this guy? He's the guy who doubled the overdose deaths in Guelph by opening the safe injection sites. So I just can't understand why he's upset about it now. Now it's a problem? What, like your kids, now they want to move out and buy a house, or now they need to access the trails or whatever else that's on here, the parks, et cetera, downtowns, and now you're upset about it? Seems a little late, Cam. Lisa says, hey, Cam, go check out the Silver Creek Skate Park. Should barbecue areas and picnic areas be turned into a camp? Where is the recovery model for addicts? Handing out free drugs is clearly not working. And this is a Kitchener article from years ago from 2020. With 5 months to go, Guelph doubles last year's number of overdose deaths. We're killing people. It's made. And Cam Guthrie's just now upset that the drug addicts are making our public places problematic. Just now, right? Like a little late, bud. National Post says Canadian politicians need better financial training. The article is actually just about how Canadians generally need better financial training and we're not well trained financially, etc. And it talks specifically about how the Liberals are spending like drunken sailors, etc., etc. But the article is not as specific as the headline implies. So I think it's true, but it's not worth our time to go into the article at this point in time. Concerned Citizen says the United Kingdom have an ideological government, just like Canada, who ignore biological reality for a tiny minority's feelings. This is dangerous territory. So again, a tiny minority's feelings, these people, somebody's emotions about how somebody else feels about them shouldn't impact policy, because your emotions are like really, really crazy things. They can do all sorts of things to you. And the idea that a man can be a woman is false, or a woman can be a man is false. And pointing that out and saying like this is not something that can happen is not hateful, and it's not something that's meant to hurt somebody's feelings. It just is. It would be like being really offended if you had a special table and you're like, I feel very strongly about this table. Don't put anything on the table. And like everybody said okay, and then somebody put something on the table and really reinforced you losing your mind about this whole table thing. It is not a beneficial thing for you or for them. It reinforces your mental illness. It reinforces your mental health disorder, especially when talking about gender, something that's unchangeable, right? Like, don't put something on the table. All right, fine. But like deciding that this hand offends me, right? I can't stand this hand. This hand being on my body is terrible. We have to cut it off. That's a mental health issue. That's not an issue with your hand. Your hand has not offended you. Like that is, and we shouldn't make that real. We shouldn't say, you know what, you're right. That hand is terrible. Let's cut it off. Like, that would be crazy. If you went to your doctor and said, my hand is in need of being cut off, your doctor would say, okay, tell me more. And it's like, I identify as a one-handed person, and like the second hand is just too much. And so like the doctor wouldn't then like, let's explore options for taking off that hand for you. That's not how that would work, right? And so why do we do that with sex? Why do we do that with things that are much more arguably important than your hand, right? And your hand is very important, right? If you were like, listen, I'm blind, I'd like to be blind now. I read a story, and it's an awful story, so fast forward a minute if you don't want to hear an awful story. But I read a story years ago talking about, it was like 2014, and it was talking about deaf parents who gave birth to a hearing son. And the deaf community is a different community, and hearing is not part of the deaf community. And if you're a hearing person, even children of deaf people don't get into the deaf community if they're not deaf. Right. And so they wanted their child to be deaf, but they couldn't get that. They couldn't make that happen in the United States because, do no harm. And so they took the kid down to Mexico, and it was a sad story. And the rest is exactly what you think. And the kid said, why can't I hear my cartoon songs anymore? And I was like, right. Like that's right in the gut, right? Like the reality of this thing sets in, and you're just like, jeepers creepers. Why would you cut your hand off? Why would you cut off your healthy sex organs? You ideologically brainwashed moron. And why are so many politicians getting behind it, right? So trans athletes should be allowed in women's sports, says new culture secretary in the UK. So yikes, Canada has been blazing the trail, and now we are watching other countries really lean into the false reality that has been set by all of this trans ideology. Pooping on beaches is becoming a top headline issue. This chick is mad about it. She's okay. She's funny. She's a little bit foul-mouthed, et cetera, et cetera. It's a little raw. Let's just call it that. Here we go.
Let me start off by saying that over my dead body would I go to a different fucking country, not read the rules, and take a shit on the public beach? And if I did, I fully intend for them to shame the fuck out of me. Why? Because that's what I get for going to a different country and not reading up the rules and giving people E. coli poisoning. I don't think you guys understand what E. coli does to your body, okay? Be so fucking for real right now. This has, first of all, the Indians that are here, prior to mass immigration, the Indians that have come over here, I never seen them taking a dump on the fucking beach. So I don't think this is about race. I think this is about massively irresponsible immigration just coming to fruition in one of the ways, and that is people getting E. coli infections because they're taking dumps on our beaches.
It's a little unclear, right? Other people are getting E. coli infections because certain population groups, new arrivals from India specifically, are pooping on the beaches, and then people are getting E. coli from that, right? Because it's not healthy, and she's upset. She's upset about all that. I can understand that, right? It's one of those things. Very understandable, I think. So it's becoming mainstream to talk about. It's not just ferrymen and memers now. Everybody's kind of talking about this whole, hey, have you noticed that Canada was paying other third world countries to put up signs that said no pooping on the beach, and now Canada needs to put those signs here, right? Isn't that wild? Here it is. Here's the sign in Ghana. It says Government of Canada paid for, right? Beaches are not toilets. Don't do it here, right? And that's, I mean, yeah, like that's why they don't have porta potties. Like, we could export porta potties. We could export porta potties. That'd be easy, right? Simple solution. Holly Doan says solar panels pose significant pollution risk, says the Public Services and Procurement Canada. Landfilling of used panels too costly to recycle will see toxic chemicals leach into groundwater, department warns. Well, they're going to bury that. Nobody wants to hear that the solar panels, the solution to climate change, is actually a problem, right? But it is, and we've known that all along. And so, I mean, yay that people are reporting on it, but I'm not surprised that nobody's doing anything about it. And like, we're going to continue leaning into this, even when there are better options out there, period. And it is concerning that there aren't a lot of alternatives being talked about, and people who do create alternate energy machines and things like that usually end up poisoned or dead or just disappeared, right? So your mileage may vary, but it doesn't seem like coming up with an energy machine that doesn't rely on oil or anything like that will end up with you being deep sixed, right? Robin Urbach, let's talk about China, because China's a big thing to talk about currently. Robin says, what is Jolie talking about? It's not the government that has a problem with China interfering in our elections, threatening our citizens, etc., but Canadian perceptions? What? And so Globe Politics says, Jolie tells China's top diplomat Canada won't tolerate any form of interference in our democracy. And these are quotes from the article. Quote, it's not the government, it's more Canadian perceptions toward China, which are negative right now. And it's important for China to understand that. So China needs to understand that Canadians have a negative perception towards it. Did she explain that it's the interference in our election and bankrolling a whole bunch of our MPs that's specifically the problem? Here it is. Bilateral relations, a major reset is unlikely in part because of unfavorable perceptions of China among Canadians, she says. So interesting. Margaret is responding to this whole thing. Robert Fife is reporting, Jolie tells China's top diplomat Canada won't tolerate any form of interference in our democracy. Margaret says, Minister Jolie said to Wang, quote, it's not the government, it's more Canadian perceptions toward China, which are negative right now, and it's important for China to understand that. Really? You can't say that we won't tolerate you can't say that we won't tolerate interference and then say that the Canadian government's not negative. Yeah, it's a mess. The diplomatic relations with China are a mess, and I don't think they're getting any better under Mel Jolie. Tasha says China's dog-beating sticks are being upgraded, says China's blog of Mel Jolie's visit to Beijing. So Canada's saying, what did she say? And Beijing is saying, Tesha is doing this opinion piece in the National Post, and she says China aims to keep Melanie Joly in line. Is she even aware? Doesn't seem so. Whenever a Canadian politician travels abroad, it's always useful to see how the foreign press report on the trip. It helps one gain insight into how the host country really sees Canada and whether we are accomplishing anything or just shooting ourselves in the foot. Case in point, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's ill-fated jaunt to India in 2018, which was panned by the Indian media for his Bollywood cosplay and photo ops with Sikh extremists. Ooh. In 2024, that hindsight's 2020, right? Not exactly a shining moment on the world stage. The same could be said about Global Affairs Minister Mel Joly's recent visit to China, where there were no fashion faux pas. Joly's trip to China exposed the current government's refusal to see China for what it is, a threat to the West and the democratic order. Instead, Global Affairs crowed that Minister Joly's visit reaffirmed the minister's commitment to pragmatic engagement with China and the development of sound and stable bilateral relations that advance and protect Canadian interests, contribute to security and stability, and enhance deep and historic people-to-people ties. That's not exactly how the Chinese language press describe it. 10 Cent News headline reads, Beijing welcomes Canadian Foreign Minister Joly. Foreign Minister Wang Yi mercilessly reminds you need to seriously reflect and castigated Canada for engaging in naval exercises with Japan and the US in the South China Sea. Not only has it not sent officials to visit China, but it has also continued to provoke China. For such a country that has no intention of repenting, China needs to warn it. The Global Times, another mouthpiece of the regime, described Joly's visit as an icebreaker, but then went on to remark that a number of Canadian politicians hold no independent foreign policy positions of their own, and what they squawk over and over again is the rhetoric of China hawks in the United States. My favorite is this blog by former Chinese military officer, which was posted by Alberta journalist Andy Lee on X. It parroted the use of the term icebreaker, but added that bringing dog food to show loyalty to the United States has become the diplomatic instinct of the Trudeau government. China will not tolerate Canada catering to the West's political correctness. China's diplomatic style is changing, and our dog-beating sticks are also being upgraded. ARF. Joly's visit to Beijing was the first by a Canadian official since 2017. In 2018, the Chinese government arbitrarily arrested Canadian citizens Michael Korvig and Michael Spavor. They were spies, and we know that now? In retaliation for Canada's detention of Huawei exec Meng Wanzhou, relations between Canada and China have been in the deep freeze since then, and rightly so. Beijing's belligerence has only increased, as has its expectations that we merrily go along with it. Weird. Interesting, right? All of that is interesting, and our diplomacy seems to be failing in Canada. And that's, again, not surprising. I'm just disappointed. Here's Toria, and she's sharing this Zelensky thing. Apparently, Zelensky's singing a different tune, right? He's saying we've got to end the war because of lives and stuff.
I think all of us understand that we have to finish the war as soon as possible, of course, not to lose people lives. Mm-hmm. I think...
Very convincing on that last look, right? That last look is right? Yeah, sure. Here is Garnet Genius, and he wants to, this was posted July 23rd, that's yesterday at 3 p.m., okay? And so this is Garnet in the House of Commons, but they're on break right now, so this is just recirculating old video content. But he says, the Liberal government has continually dropped the ball on supporting Ukraine in ways that make sense. Conservatives were pushing for the government to supply Ukraine by seizing and repurposing Russian assets even before the war, but the NDP refused to back us. This is the government that is the government in waiting. They're on deck to be up next, right? And they want to fund Ukraine, arm them to the teeth, right? And I don't need to play this, but maybe we'll play it. Let's play it and see what Garnet says here.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Of course, Conservatives strongly support Ukraine. We supported sending lethal weapons to Ukraine even before the war, at a time when the NDP opposed it and spoke out against it. We supported consistent sanctions against Russia, even when the Liberals were granting sanctions exemptions to Russia. I wanted to ask the member about seizure of Russian assets. This is mentioned in the cooperation agreement, Clause N. I think very important language there about seizing Russian assets and using them to support Ukraine. One great way that we can continue to ensure Ukraine has the financial support they require to fight the war and to rebuild is to repurpose Russian assets. And frankly, the government has been behind on this. I wonder if the member would support our call to repurpose confiscated Russian assets and use them to support Ukraine.
The honourable member.
So there you go. And they want to get us further involved in this whole thing, where what we should be doing is saying, good luck, Ukraine. We're not sending any more anything. No money, no weapons, no nothing. Sorry about your luck. I hope you're able to negotiate peace well. See you soon. Bye. I mean, maybe not. We'll see. Maybe we'll just be talking to you through Russia. True North says, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh says, Justin Trudeau, we've got some electioneering going on, of course, because the election is soon-ish. And NDP leader Jagmeet Singh says, Justin Trudeau has failed Canadians, but refuses to pull out of the NDP coalition agreement with the Liberals. So that's funny.
When it comes to housing, the North has always felt neglected, ignored, like it doesn't matter. And now we've got a housing crisis, all that negligence means people are really feeling that. You can't find a place that's affordable. If you've got a place you live in constant fear, if you lose it, you'll have nowhere to go. And we know that Justin Trudeau has been in power for 9 years, has ignored the North, hasn't solved these problems. And I want to be very clear. He has had the opportunity to take on corporate greed with corporate grocery stores, failed to do so. He had the opportunity to build homes that are affordable for people, failed to do so. He has failed.
A lot of talk has been talked about your opposition, the governing party. Sounds like we are close to an election. So are you ready to, end your partnership with the Liberals and put the words to action at the polls?
Well, either way, we're ready. We're getting close to an election. Election is scheduled for the by law election date is going to be in 2025. So either way, we're close to an election. We want people to know the choice. That choice is really important. We'll be ready to find an election whenever that happens. And we want people to know what their choices are. You got a choice between an out of touch.
Blah, blah, blah. Nonsense. So Jagmeet Singh says, yeah, we'll keep the confidence supply deal. We're gonna take the election to 2025. There'll be an election in 25. Wow, right? Doesn't see any problem with the current government and the Chinese people running it. Sam Cooper is responding to Andrew Coyne. Andrew Coyne says, my latest, the Liberal ship is adrift. If the captain will not change course, will the crew? Sam Cooper says, likewise, the government's response to the revelations now documented in the 3 separate official reports of massive Chinese interference in Canada's democracy, hugely enabled by its own negligence and indifference, was to send the Foreign Minister Mel Joly to Beijing to make amends. Ms. Joly reported afterwards that she tried to make her hosts understand that it's not the government that stands in the way of a thaw in bilateral relations, but it's more Canadian perceptions towards China, which are negative right now. Can't think of why, right? Yeah, sure. So here's Justin Trudeau again, electioneering. These are policies that apply to people who live in very high, dense apartments right next to a railway station, and soon they won't be allowed to leave. Right? This is appealing to people who sit in traffic and who would rather read a book than sit in traffic. I'll just tell them to read an audiobook. Like, holy smoke, what are you doing? Here's Justin Trudeau for about a minute. Here we go.
That's the Ion Light Rail. It runs through Kitchener-Waterloo. If you live near public transit like the Ion, you get to spend less money on parking, less time stuck in traffic. People across the country need more options, more convenience. So we've invested record numbers in cities to build more housing faster, as long as they change their bylaws to make it easier to build housing near transit. And on the flip side, we're investing massively in public transit, record investments in Canadian history, to make sure that we build more transit as long as cities are, you guessed it, making it easier to build housing.
It's Poilievre's plan, or the plan that Poilievre outlined earlier in his leadership race. Guelph used to have rails, the street rails. What are they called? It's just street rails. Like Toronto's got, like San Francisco's got. Guelph used to have the same one, and a whole bunch of other cities used to have similar ones. And they would go around downtown, and there's a whole thing. You can go see the historical footage in the Guelph Museum, which is weird because there's whole sections of the Guelph Museum which are just made up history now. But anyway, regardless of all that, we used to have transit, and then they ripped it all out in favor of the car because energy was so cheap. And now they're saying, oh, yeah, the energy is not cheap and abundant. Actually, it's really, really, really rare and stuff, and we need to have public transit. Public transit's awful, 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 awful. In Guelph, if you have to, let's say you have a doctor's appointment and you're at work in the south end and your doctor's in the north end of Guelph, which happens, my doctor's in the north end of Guelph. Actually, not anymore, but it was. So to get public transit, right? Say you were at work at 9 o'clock as usual, and you have to go to public transit for an 11 o'clock appointment. You have to leave, if you're in the north end of Guelph, you have to leave at 10 o'clock. You have to catch that 10 o'clock bus, 9:45. So you get on the bus at 9:45, and it takes you an hour to get to where you're going. And then you have your appointment at 11 o'clock, and then it's going to take you an hour to get back. Whereas it would take 15 minutes to drive yourself, right? You have to take 2 buses. And so if you complicate that with you have to take a child to the doctor, now you can't even go to work because you just have to go to get the child at the school and then take the bus, and you're going to be late for work because it takes so long to work through the transit in order to do anything. You couldn't drop your kids off at camp reliably, reasonably, in time, properly, in a time efficient way, right? Like, the whole idea of public transit sounds really good. What about the violence? There's all sorts of violence on public transit. There's all sorts of politics on public transit. Like, and by politics, I mean like you walk on and there's no seats, or there's one seat left, but it's by a weird person, or they're smelly, or like there's all sorts. And then like you get up to like you sit down and you realize, oh no, I've sat down next to a smelly person. And then you get up to leave and they're like, well, you're leaving because I'm smelly. And then you're like, oh no, I'm gonna violate some weird bus rule, right? Like some weird bus politics. And then like, transit's a nightmare. Am I agoraphobic? Hello everyone, thanks very much for watching. This is just a short version of a longer show. If you'd like to get the whole show, you can go over to CanadaPoly.com and sign up for a subscription. Just look in the drop-down tab for Shop and Donate and look for subscriptions, and you'll get immediate access to the full show. Love to see you. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful